To start off, I'll give a little bit of background and then make sense with it later. But my name's Brody Tate. I'm a communications senior here. And just general background that's going to be really confusing. I break and defy stereotypes, but I also create stereotypes. I am gay, I'm a Christian, and I'm a Republican. And so a lot of people get really confused with that. I was raised in Evanston, Wyoming, which is a not so fun town on the other side of the state. And it's mostly predominantly LDS, very Mormon. It's right next to Salt Lake, so we're pretty much known as Utah. So it's just the running joke over there. But I was raised on a ranch family, in a very, very conservative family. I have 86 cousins on my dad's side alone, and I have 8 on my mom's side. And I pretty much have no relationship on my dad's side of the family between one aunt and my grandma. So if I say my family, I'm mostly referring to my mom from the rest of all these stories. But I spent the majority of my life in Evanston until I was about in 8th grade, and I moved to Texas. But growing up in Evanston, I always knew that I liked boys for some reason. I thought they were prettier than girls, no offense, considering the majority of this room is girls, but I always just, they were just fascinated me. All my friends were girls, I got along really well, we could communicate better, and boys were just fascinating to me. And so I always just sort of knew something was different, and I never wanted to tell anybody. And growing up, the older I got, the more I knew how bad it was. I went to church when I was 6 with a family friend, and I was really scared because my parents didn't go with me, and I was with his family and never been to a different church. We were holding hands, and a guy in the I even forget the terms. The guy in the crowd walked up and said that kids don't do that. Boys don't hold each other's hands. You're going to go to hell if you do that. So I was shocked for the rest of my life. Growing up, I can't tell anybody. I can't even hold hands with another boy. I don't even know if you can hug other people. It was just really confusing. And when I got baptized when I was 8, my family had this huge big ceremony. I made it a really big deal. This is a huge blessing for the church. And I went to primary school the following week, and I asked a question in church, got yelled at, told I was going to hell. I'm this is not the place for me. I was I can't do this anymore. So I went home crying. I told my parents I was never going back, and they pretty much just cut off going to church after that point entirely. And my grandma is the only practicing Mormon left in my family. And so the more I grew up, the more I heard people in my family referring things to earrings as fag tags. My uncles talked about that all the time. My family was a little racist. And so I just grew up knowing that I could never actually tell them what I feel or what I thought, or have friends that were Hispanic or black or anything. I just had to grow up in this life where I conformed to whatever my family wanted me to do. And my aunts were really close to me. My aunt's really nice, completely different from most of my family. And then my grandparents were raised in Star Valley, Utah, raised Mormon, married at 18, perfect traditional little family. And when I moved to Texas, I accidentally came out to a friend in science class or something, and she's oh no, a bunch of people down here are, it's fine, that's just perfectly normal. I lived in Houston, Texas, so not a big shocker for a big city. And I thought it was the craziest thing, because in my town, if I would have told anybody, everyone would have known the next day. Everyone would be talking about it. My parents would probably hate me, and so I was completely afraid. And I was just sort of the little perfect boy who had a lot of friends that were girls and was really nice to people and got perfect grades. And I think my parents thought I was going to grow up and be that perfect nice boy with the perfect little white picket fence and family and wife and kids. And my parents got really busy with work and everything, and I became really, really depressed. I lost 45 pounds in a week, completely overnight eating junk food, and it was horrifying. And I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell my friends. I was too afraid to tell anybody in my family. And this went on for months, about 6 months, to the point where I tried telling my parents that I needed help. And they're oh no, you'll be fine. You don't need to talk to anybody. You'll be fine. We just moved here. It's a transition. And I'm no, you don't understand. I really need to talk to somebody other than you guys. And they didn't do anything. And a couple weeks later, I tried to commit suicide. And in the middle of it, without getting into too much detail, I blacked out between actually bleeding to where at the point I remember I called my aunt for no reason. I don't remember how or why, but I remember having a phone in my hand and I just called her completely hysterically crying. And so my family relationship is I never really told my parents. I never came out to them until I was actually outed when I was 16 to my mom. And the first thing she said was, "How do you know?" And I thought that was the most offensive question you could ever ask a person. And I was just 16, didn't know what to do, a little teenager. And I was well, I've never been attracted to girls. I've never liked them. They've always been my friends, but I've never been sexually attracted or romantically interested at all. And she's well, I think it's a phase. And I'm like, oh, okay, here we go with this. Like, eventually she'll get over this. She's like, I just think you don't know. I think you're confused. I went through that whole phase. And then we stopped talking for about 5 minutes. And then she just said, you know you can die from this, right? And I just looked at her like, what do I come back with that? Like, are you kidding me? And she's like, well, this is really, really dangerous and you can die. And my research that I'd done from the time I was 13 to 16 without telling anybody, I instantly flipped the switch and I'm like, you do know that lesbians have the lowest contraction rate of anybody in the United States or the world or worldwide for HIV and AIDS. And she's like, well, I think that's different for homosexual men. I'm like, actually the statistics were decreasing in the last year and they're actually increasing right now in straight, single, heterosexual white women over the age of 35. And she just sort of looked at me and she just was completely baffled. I'm like, I've done everything, I've tried everything, I've tried to change, I've talked to the bishops in the churches, which I'm actually excommunicated in 2 churches in my hometown for, and my parents didn't know for like 5 years. And not officially because I haven't like, gone through the process, but if I ever step back into the church, they'll excommunicate me. And it's like we go through this huge fight and it ended up with us yelling and her crying and her saying, she's like, I'm going back to work. We won't talk about this again. And I just sat there feeling like the most insignificant person in the world. And I was a mama's boy. I never really had a relationship with my dad, even though he was around. And everything, like we did everything together. I was my mom's perfect little son up until that point. And I just sat there thinking, I will never be able to have my relationship back with my parents. I'll never be able to talk to them. I'll never be able to discuss this. Like my life is basically over. And I ended up telling my brother, and he was like, well, I still accept you, I love you as my brother. He's like, I just don't understand it. And I'm like, you don't understand what? He's like, I just don't know how that works. And he got really confused. And he's like, I'm sorry for all the gay jokes that I made. And I just started laughing. I'm like, that's just, okay, well, cool. And then we never talked about it up until a couple years ago. My sister still thinks it's awkward to ask me. She thinks I'm gonna get offended if she asks me about things like gay marriage. She had to write a paper and she's like, well, is it okay if I ask you for help on this paper? And I'm like, yeah, I have more than enough information to give you. And it got to the point where my mom finally talked to me about it 2 years after she found out. And the first thing she said was, my teacher friend has a son who's gay and you should go and meet him. And I was like really confused. She's like, well, you should go meet him and you probably should go on a date. And I was like, wait, how did we go from you saying I was gonna die to setting me up with people? I'm like, this is a good step, but I'm just really confused. And I was just sitting there and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. She's like, well, I thought it would help. I was like, I don't think I need you setting me up, but this is a good step. And I got to the point where I'm like, I probably should tell my dad. I don't know if my mom's told him, I don't know who knows. My aunts, my grandparents had found out and no one cared. Like they were all like, yeah, we've pretty much known since you were 3. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like even my Mormon grandma still loves me more than I think her other grandkids. And it just got ridiculous, and I'm like, well, my dad needs to know. Like, I think it's fair that I should tell him, regardless of what he thinks. And so I emailed him, because we don't have a relationship at all. And so I sent him this email, and I'm like, I don't care what you think. I don't care if you accept me or not. I just think you should know so I can live my life the way I want to, and you need to quit telling me to go on dates with girls. And so I sent him like this huge long email, and his response back was really short, but it was like, I'll always love you as my son, and this took me off guard. And I was like, I don't think this took anybody off guard, other than you and Mom, but okay. And we haven't talked about it since. I brought it up this summer, which was really bad because my parents are getting divorced, so my communication with them has dropped off the face of the planet. And he still won't talk about it. He still refuses to. So the only people in my family that I even talk to about it are my aunts, and they still do the whole, like, that's really great, but be careful. Like, even with my activism on campus, they'll be like, that's great, but be careful. Don't, like, get beaten up or killed. I was like, that's not how Laramie really works anymore, but... So my family.
But she remembers probably Matthew Shepard, and that may be what scares her.
So my family all the time tells me that they didn't want me to come here. They think that what I do is great, just I need to be careful and like strength in numbers kind of thing. But other than that, my family doesn't talk about it. It's mostly my friends who I'm really close with and became my new family that I talk about things with. So that's pretty much my story.